Hello class. Today we're going to launch into a new unit, Unit D, on voting and voting rights. So today if you've read section 1 of chapter 6, that would help, as well as if you printed off the PowerPoint slides, you could take notes on that as well. We're going to look primarily today at the history of voting rights and whose responsibility it is to allow or disallow voting. And as you see in this case, the Constitution leaves that choice up to each state. So in Michigan, the state of Michigan decides who's allowed to vote in Michigan, and so forth. Suffrage is a vocab term you should be familiar with, which means the right to vote. The word franchise can also mean the same thing. Please take note of those two vocab words for the unit today. Another vocab word is the electorate. The electorate are all the people entitled to vote in a given election. Initially, as you probably know from your reading, the right to vote was very limited. Very few people could participate in the government. You had to be male, you had to be white, you had to have property, so it was very restrictive to participate in voting. However, as we're going to come to see, the size of the electorate has expanded greatly. Each step allowing many more people to vote, some of the significant ones, of course, when women were allowed to vote in 1920, which almost doubled the size of the electorate. Other notable changes we'll see throughout the civil rights movement as black people more and more gain the right to vote. And the most recent change in the early 1970s when the voting age was lowered to 18, which again expanded the electorate. So the expansion of the electorate then to its present size has 5 basic stages that you would wish to become familiar with. The religious, property, and tax qualifications were eliminated in the early 1800s already. Then shortly after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment was intended to give all races voting privileges. However, many states in the South found ways to keep them from voting. Then, as mentioned earlier, in 1920, the 19th Amendment allowed women the right to vote, or suffrage. Then, the fourth phase was the 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement. During the Civil Rights Movement, a series of legislation was passed by the pushing of the civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and others, as well as the legislation. The 23rd and 24th Amendments were passed during the 1960s. Last, as I mentioned earlier, the 26th Amendment lowering the voting age. You may wish to become familiar with those phases. The Constitution sets 5 limits on what the states can do as far as qualifying voters. If they're allowed to vote, in any person who a state allows to vote in the most numerous branch of its own legislature, in case those who would go to Lansing and serve, they must also be allowed to vote for United States Congress. You cannot deprive persons the right to vote on their race, color, or if they were once a slave, or on their sex, or require any kind of payment to vote, or restrict because they're due to age if they're at least 18. There are 3 factors that most states require. First, citizenship in the United States. Second, a residency in the state in which they would like to vote. Now, there are minimum residency requirements that you've lived in the state a certain number of days or months. Although the federal government has determined that it cannot be too unusual, the amount. But you can have a residency requirement, and each state may be a little different. And then, of course, age we already discussed. All states except North Dakota require you to be registered to vote, including Michigan. You must be registered to vote. So as long as you meet the other requirements and you have a registration card, no literacy can be required or poll taxes. And there are other restrictions that you should read through in your book for certain criminal acts or for insanity or other things. There could be reasons for incompetency in voting, depending on the state again. So because of these changes, political participation and awareness in America has been on the rise. You can see those who vote has risen, but it tails off when it gets to things where people would really want to do more than just get out and vote. For example, people who would actually read an entire newspaper article or magazine article about a topic is very slim, or give actual money or time to these efforts. So there is quite a bit of participation, but minimal effort, which is a concern in a democracy such as ours.